Well, hi there, and welcome to this webcast. Jonathan Foust here. Thank you so much for making the time. In a few minutes, we are going to check out an interview I did with the incomparable Shawn Parell. Before then, though, a quick little set of announcements. First of all, thank you so much to the Insight Meditation community of Washington for streaming this, and to our producer, Glenn Harrison, for making this happen and getting all this to you. Also, just to let you know, there is a mindful movement class led by Rita Moran at 6:30 Eastern Standard Time, which will take you right up to this, which starts at 7:30 Eastern Standard Time. If you'd like to join Rita for mindful movement, please feel free to check out the links on my website and on my Facebook page. Also, I've got a newsletter I send out every couple months now. I send out a compendium of talks and my best photography from those months. And I've got a weekly as well. That's on my website. And finally, this is all offered freely. No one's to be denied access to these practices and teachings. That was one of the foundational teachings. And I love that. I love that this is available to anybody. If you feel inspired to help keep this rolling, thank you. I very much appreciate that. So we're going to move right into this interview. Shawn Parell is a wonderful teacher and a wonderful guide, just a bright light on the planet. And we had a conversation around embodied practice and all that comes with somatic inquiry. I hope you enjoyed this, and do check out Shawn's offerings. She's got a beautiful course and wonderful materials that might support you in your practice. Enjoy.
Welcome to the Guest House. I'm Shawn Parell. I'm an integrative therapist, a yoga and meditation teacher, a lifelong student of the thesis of our belonging, and I'm also a parent and a fellow human being grappling with many of the same questions that you may be grappling with too. In these conversations, I'm turning to some of the folks I most admire, and together we're exploring the complexities and also the creative potential of being human in an era of radical change. Thank you so much for being with us. Many of us sense the benefits of mindfulness in our lives. Walking in the woods, in moments of wonder, listening quietly to a friend. But when it comes to seated meditation, we often don't know where to begin, or we struggle to stick with regular practice. Maybe you've dabbled with a meditation app and you're ready to develop your own practice. Or maybe, like many of us, you're simply struggling with the overwhelming nature of modern existence, of your daily life, and you're open to whatever might help. I created Foundations of Mindfulness Meditation as an audio course to help you establish and nurture the foundations of a mindfulness meditation practice. Cultivate a balanced mind, a wise heart, and a practice that will help you align with your values in your life. You can complete the course in 6 weeks or at your own pace. Download audio sessions to listen anywhere on your preferred device, and receive resources including engaging talks, guided meditations, and supplemental written materials to usher you through this experience and support various learning styles. Learn all about it at shawnparell.com/mindfulness course. My guest today is Jonathan Foust. Jonathan has had a dedicated meditation practice since 1972, and he's been leading retreats and teacher training since 1984. He's a guiding teacher with the Insight Meditation Community of Washington and a founder of the Meditation Teacher Training Institute of Washington. Formerly a senior teacher and president of Kripalu Center, he now leads retreats and intensives, teaches courses, one-on-ones with those who feel drawn to explore body-centered inquiry. He supports mentors of meditation and leads classes and year-long programs. Jonathan lives outside of Washington, D.C. with his wife, Tara Brock, who's also a renowned mindfulness meditation teacher and psychologist and author. I'm so happy to have you with me, Jonathan, today. Thank you for joining me.
I'm so happy to be here in 1972 when I started meditation. That makes me really old.
You've passed your 50-year mark of meditating.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable.
Yeah.
What a journey.
Well, I remember, I remember meeting you maybe in the kind of early to mid 2000s, the first 5 years of the millennia. And there were a few events that we were sort of collaborating on. You generously participated in. And one of my memories of connection with you was that you were invited to be the keynote speaker at a large meditation and yoga fundraiser in Washington, D.C. And I was one of the organizers of that event. And the talk was starting at 3 p.m. or something. And you had arrived by 2:15 or so 2:30 or something. And there was no parking anywhere to be found. And you were driving around, you were stuck in traffic and driving around looking for a parking spot for it must have been an hour. It was like, it was one of those moments where we were inside. In retrospect, we should have just sent somebody out to go park your car for you, right? But I just remember why it was remarkable to me was that when you actually finally were able to get your car parked and get into the building, my nervous system was like on fire for you, It's just like, and you walked in and you were totally calm. I think you had probably taken a deep breath, but you walked in, you were totally calm. You were so gracious and able to just kind of seamlessly step into, giving this keynote talk. And I remember thinking, this guy is a real meditator. This guy has a real practice.
And that was either my meditation practice kicking in or just me deeply suppressing the trauma. Oh no.
Well, one or the other.
I
It,
remember
it,
that.
it left a mark for me. I would love to begin our conversation today, speaking of meditating for um, 50 plus years, just on where you began. What were the sort of formative elements in your early years that when you look back, kind of led onward to a life as a meditation teacher and, practitioner and guide for others?
Well, I have an interesting theory on that. Having lived in an ashram for 24 years and having been around people who've had depth practices, it seems like a lot of people who are really giving themselves to spiritual inquiry or spiritual awakening quite often had childhoods where they didn't really feel like they fit into their family unit. So there's always that kind of restlessness, I think, is kind of part of it. I
Yeah.
always joke, I would always, as a kid, I'd just sort of be waiting for my real family to come and pick me up, you know.
Mhm.
But for
Yeah.
me, actually, when I was 6 or 7, I grew up on a farm in the Pennsylvania Dutch country, back on a dirt road, 2 cars a day drove by and there were the neighbors. And
Wow.
um, I had an experience of like leaning up against this big pine tree behind the house. Again, I was 6, 7, maybe 8. I don't recall. And the only way I can describe it was I just like merged with the tree. And I had this, I remember in my 6, 7, 8-year-old brain, I tried to describe it as the stars in the sky were cells in my body.
Mhm.
It was just amazing, like a little awakening experience. And I ran into the house to tell my mother, and she looked at me and she said, "Wash your hands, it's time for dinner."
Right.
And there was this like searing experience of like, no one, she doesn't get this. Like no one gets this. And I really feel like that was a really deep seed that was planted in me of like, what was that? And how do I get back to that? Because that was real. And so that was a big part of it. And I'm imagining it was the same for you to some degree. either some early knowing from the innocence of a young brain,
Mhm.
or a sense of not belonging.
Well, for me, I think it was probably a combination of both of those. But I do think what in your story that feels really poignant is how often we dismiss the really expanded states of consciousness that children have access to, like not so layered with conditioning, right? As, oh, that's just your imagination.
Yeah,
And um, and the kind of affirmation that can really make a difference to affirm the experiences of our, I mean, I have two little kids, and I think about that when they come and they are talking about something that they've experienced, that to just go, wow, that
hmm
is so cool.
yeah, yeah,
Because
yeah,
these are expanded states of consciousness that thread forward in terms of their their experience of consciousness over time throughout their lives,
exactly.
if we don't repress those or call
Yeah,
them something other than real.
yeah. And if you want to take away consciousness, the experience of pure consciousness, take away the language. And so I think that's certainly true, for children and for others. When you try to describe a mystical experience to anyone, it sounds like you've taken one too many bong hits, even
Right.
if it's a real experience. Yeah, and that's part of what I find so interesting around certainly hanging around with other people who have a practice to be able to describe something. I used to always joke, living in the ashram, when someone would say, "How you doing?" and you'd say, "I just feel this low grade anxiety, and I feel restless, and I something just doesn't feel right." And the other person would say, "That's awesome. That's great. Your practice must be working." Because there's
Good.
an understanding that, if you want to be free, you need to encounter what isn't free.
Yeah.
And it's also interesting too, because we tend to fixate on the negative.
Mhm.
And it's certainly helpful to kind of untangle, the knots inside. But I also think there are times when it's really important to actually explore and investigate those really deeply wholesome states, and make more room for those, get more familiar with those as well.
And isn't it interesting how often encounter we have to get so sick of living inside of a negative, a perpetuated negative feelings in order to find the way down and through into more wholesome.
Yeah.
What you said about when is my real family going to come? I think so many practitioners, there's a longing that can be really the doorway into a life of practice. It's a longing for deeper belonging.
Absolutely. And it's such a deep drive. It's such a deep drive. And quite often we hook it to things. We're looking for things to kind of fill that longing. But if we can really investigate the longing, there's such a purity to it, such a deep purity. The longing and yearning is really the fuel for really sincere investigation.
Yeah. So you talk about arriving at Kripalu for lunch and staying for 24 years, which sounds kind of accidental, but I imagine that what compelled you more deeply to stay was a sense of longing and a seeking for belong. And I wonder, can we kind of moving forward from you in Amish country to arriving at
Yeah.
24 at Kripalu?
When I learned TM, I learned Transcendental Meditation when I was 15. And when I had my initiation into it, that first experience was one of those kinesthetic knowings. I was just like, I'm going to be doing this for the rest of my life. It was just
Mm.
this knowing of like, this is the doorway. I was raised a Quaker, and there's all this language around the still small voice within, and follow your conscience and all that stuff. But there was no methodology. So someone was like, oh my God, there's a methodology to this. sort of stilling the mind and exploration. So I have had a pretty consistent practice since that time, um, fueled by fueled by that longing and interest and yearning and so forth. So when I literally stumbled into Kripalu, I'd been in the Peace Corps in West Africa. I'll spare you the story, but I tried to cross the Sahara Desert on my bicycle. Um, I thought that would be an interesting thing to do.
That sounds hot.
Yeah, it was hot and it was dusty, and I didn't make it. Um, so I literally stumbled in for the day, and I thought maybe I'll stay here. But suddenly it was like, oh my God, there are other people who are wanting what I want. And back then at that time, the ashram was in a very, very interesting place because the founder of the original inspiration for the ashram was this teacher, Swami Kripalanandaji, who died before I had moved in. He'd gone back to India to die, but he gave what's called Shaktipat Diksha to his teacher, who was Yogi Desai, who was running the ashram. And I remember the first night, someone said, "Oh, are you coming to meditation tonight?" I thought, "Ooh, I love meditation. Yeah, I'll be there." And so I'm kind of in the back of the room, and there's this guy with long hair and a robe, and he's playing the harmonium, and he starts singing this Divine Mother chant, and suddenly people start crying, and then he just sort of like pauses, and then he goes, "Huh," and like this shockwave went through the room, and like suddenly people are like barking like dogs and shaking and crying, and I just thought, what is going on? They were so nice during the day, Then I
Welcome
went
to
to
the ashram at
meditation.
night.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like who flipped the switch? And then the next morning I went to meditation and I was barking along with everyone else. The Shakti, this invocation of this primal energy, so powerful. So for the first 3 or 4 months, every morning, every night, it was like meditating in a microwave with, 150 other people, which was a form of meditation, of course, I had never done before, but it was really quite extraordinary. It was the sense of Sangha, the sense of like, here are other people who want what I want. And that is just one of the most valuable things in practice. I always like to say if you take your 5 best friends, average out their income, it's probably your income. When I first heard that, I thought, I need new friends. Uh,
Yeah.
but the truth is, we resonate with who we spend time with. And I'm so grateful um, that I had that kind of spiritual friendship for so many years that allowed me to really go deep. Because in those days, I had a celibacy vow, a poverty vow, 6.5 days a week of, pretty intensive, daily practice, evening practice. It was pretty cool.
When people come to you who have a mindfulness practice, but have not had that, I mean, it's actually very rare. Like few people have had that depth of immersion in Sangha and in a ritual life, in a ritual monastic life. What's your counsel for them? Like, how do we, when people say, I want to deepen my practice, right? And here I am as a householder. Do you feel like there is a sort of balance that is a healthy balance for people to strike of finding those times in life when they can really deeply retreat and be, in a container for their own practice
Yeah.
and being in the flow of everyday life and applying mindfulness?
Yeah, there's a big distinction between like lay people and monastic. Monastic practices, where everything's built in, you've got the soft padded walls, to kind of support you. And then when you're living in the world. And I actually think living in the world with responsibilities and commitments is actually a very, very powerful way to practice because there's something around the moderation that you have to invoke can be very, very powerful. But the number one thing is sincerity. I've just come to see that more and more, that when you have back to the yearning, back to the longing,
Mhm.
the more alive, the more awake that is, the more it'll help to fuel that.
Mm.
And then it's a question of, I always think of it as regular practice with occasional depth charges. That seems to work.
That seems to be the right
Yeah, yeah.
formula.
You've got your daily practice, then you go do a week-long retreat, the top of your head blows off. You have to remember your zip code and pull it all back together. But then the richness of that retreat will feed and inform your daily practice. And your daily practice will then inform your next retreat. So I always say, and it's not a marketing ploy, that when you finish a retreat, have another one on the calendar, because
Mhm,
knowing there's a life preserver out there will
mhm,
not only help you just navigate your life, but it's going to enrich your practice too. When you know, like, oh yeah, I'm going back for another immersion, whether it's a day-long retreat or a week-long or whatever it may be.
mhm. In a way, it feels like daily practices are opportunity to touch back in to, to come into states of remembrance of more sort of cultivated, um, deeper states of consciousness than that are really that take that kind of soft padding and deep concentration and time and space to feel our way into.
Yeah. I think remembrance is the key word. You know, I have a distinction with my practice. My daily practice is, I have my maintenance practice, and then what I think of as my transformational practice. The maintenance practice is the things I do, that if I do these things, there's a good chance my nostrils will be above the waterline at the end of the day, you know? And then there's the transformational practice, which is, going deeper, having more time to kind of unwind.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
of course, that's a moving target, whatever that may be.
I was recently hearing you describe your morning routine.
Oh, no, what did I say?
Well, no, you said, well, first you talked about, oh, and I wake up and I have my kale smoothie, and then how did it? And you were like, no,
Right. Oh, that's
that
right. Yeah, my kale smoothie. I think I mentioned my kale enema too. I didn't
your
I?
kale.
Yeah. Right.
Right. And then no, but I mean, what I love about how you relate to practice is it's this very kind of moderate, like we have to, we have to, um, we have to touch in however we can touch in. We have to kind of remember here we are living in these bodies, and we don't have to be extreme.
Yeah.
These
Yeah.
practices don't need to be extreme, and allowing, I mean, I can only imagine what it was like for you to then leave the ashram and integrate into householder life.
Mhm.
That our practices need to evolve over time too.
Yes. And that's the thing I really see is, if you stay with a practice, it will evolve. It has to, because you're evolving. So when people get locked into, this is my practice and it hasn't changed in 15 years, that's good. That might really work for you. But what I find is, we're intuitively drawn to different techniques at different times, because I really think mindfulness in many ways is self-awareness and self-diagnosis. So what is my experience right now? How do I be with this? And there are
Mhm.
times when we're drawn to, like, I don't know why, but I just feel like I need to lean in a little bit. I need a little bit more discipline. Some concentration practice would be really, really helpful. And then there are times like, I'm just gripping a little too tight. My practice may be more about softening and allowing and opening up. So uh, finding that finding a genuine alive practice is such a part of the path, because there's so many techniques and so many traditions ready to tell you this is the one technique you should do forever.
Right. So there's that side of it where actually, if we pay attention to the genuine aliveness of our practice, it will evolve. And whatever infrastructure we have built around our practice, at times we necessarily have to release, right?
Yeah. And what really annoys me
Yeah.
is some of the non-dual teachers, who'll say like, it's about being. It's just be. It's just be. And what they don't tell you is that many of them spent like 10 years of doing intense concentration practice, that got them to that point. And I love the
Right.
metaphor, and I say this ad nauseum when I lead meditation, but I like to think of like focus, flow, let go. We begin, you focus, you calm, you arrive and arrive and arrive. And then sometimes it happens magically where you sort of shift into, you become aware of the flow. You become aware of what's changing. You become more aware of who you are as the observer. And there's a beautiful kind of open monitoring quality of meditation. And then
Mhm.
there are those moments when you just simply, you drop all technique and rest in presence. And I think we find our way in there. Like there are times when we know, like I'm over emotional, I'm hyper vigilant, I've got 1,000 things to do, but I can't start one. You lean into focus, you know.
Mm.
And then there are times when we naturally begin to kind of sense who we are as the witness, as the observer. And then there are times when, like right now, I'm on Cape Cod, and I love like walking along the ocean when there are other people there, because like everyone is sitting there aligned and they're all like this.
You got to describe that for the listeners.
Yeah, just open mouth, maybe slightly drooling, eyes on the horizon, just wide open space. They've arrived, they're there. So that sense of like finding our way, I always find it's helpful, to start with willfully arriving and then relax and widen and open.
Mhm. It seems like there's also the balance of like arriving and then knowing when it's time to like really feeling into when it within the evolutionary flow of a practice, knowing when it's time, where that edge is of, okay, something needs to shift here.
Yeah.
And I guess I want to go back to, because it's such a particular moment in a person's life as a practitioner when they recognize, okay, you know, this practice is actually, or this community, or this, methodology, whatever it is actually drawing me forward into something else now.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
that arriving, that being in presence is actually something is emerging here.
Yeah. Yeah.
And of course, can be scary and can definitely be, a little messy.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So,
Whatever is unseen, unfelt, and undigested over time will come marching out center stage to be seen.
right.
I love the analogy from Joseph Campbell, the circle with a line through it. Above the line is everything you're aware of. Everything below the line is everything unfelt, unseen, undigested. And the practice is moving the line. If you relax and pay attention, you start to feel things you hadn't felt before. You start to notice thought patterns and beliefs that you had no clue that they were there, or had an inkling they were there. And that's really the beauty of practice, is the insights that can arrive through just deeply relaxing and paying attention.
Mhm.
And then, of course, the thing I love about Vipassana meditation is when something is arising in your experience, is consciously moving from your anchor or your focal point to investigate it, to have tea with it. And that's becomes such a beautiful part of the art of meditation, is the sense, when do I move from my concentration anchor to actually investigate this subtle feeling of dread that's under my sternum, or this thought that keeps repeating, that might merit some deeper investigation. And that's a beautiful part of the practice.
Mhm.
And as you said, scary sometimes.
Yeah, and scary because it can be consequential, right?
Oh,
Sometimes when
absolutely.
that mind moves, you know, things buckle a little bit.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, when we have, at least in the Buddhist tradition, the Buddha allegedly, because, no one wrote anything down until much later, where the Buddha allegedly said nothing whatsoever is to be clung to as I or mine.
Mm.
And boy, when we really take that into investigation in our practice, that nothing is to be clung to as I or mine, things can really open up inside. It's can be, and it can become very disorienting. Sometimes in a scary way, and sometimes in really, really wholesome ways too.
Mhm. It brings me to that your reference to inviting Mara to tea, right? It brings me to the the awakening of the Buddha and how the deepest defense that he had against the challenges of Mara, against the profound weapon of doubt, right, was to place his hand on the ground,
Mm-hmm.
not in any kind of like aggrandizing way,
Mm-hmm.
in a very humble, deep way of this is who I am.
Yeah. Yeah.
Asking the earth, nature, spirit to just testify on our behalf, right? Where
Yeah.
it is
Yeah.
about us. It's
Mm-hmm.
about this is what I belong to.
And what he said was, I see you.
I see you.
He said, I see you. And there's something so powerful about kind of recognizing the whatever energy, whatever demon, whatever's presenting. And it's so interesting. I in my practice, I do a lot of what I call somatic inquiry, which is when you do that investigation, is recognition that your issues are in your tissues. Every thought, every emotion, every belief resides in the soma. And it's so interesting when I might be working with someone and they're aware of some like very deep, clench in the gut, and they have a sense of how long it's been there. And when I'll ask, is there a sense of how it wants you to be with it right now? How quite often people will say it just wants to be seen.
Mhm.
It's not, I need you to bow down to me. I need you to shower flower petals on me. I need you to, quite often it wants to be seen. And
Yeah.
it's so simple, but wow, it's so powerful. So powerful.
Yeah, and there's the other side of the coin, is if we're not inquiring into like what wants to be met here within my experience, then we are necessarily in some kind of avoidant
Yeah.
relationship with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So will you tell me more about somatic inquiry? I so deeply kind of resonate with this access point of somatic inquiry, and in many ways in my own life, I had no conceptualization. I didn't have any language for my experience of mindful embodiment, right?
Mm-hmm.
It, I just kept showing up and allowing for the process because I started practicing when I was young. And it took many years later before I started to actually, you know, conceptualize of my own experience. And I just wonder, as we come home to our body, what does that even mean?
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. There's an interesting thing I think of like a chain of causality, where if you look at who you are, like the foundation would be energy, just undifferentiated energy. In the yoga system calls it prana, chi, ki, Holy Spirit, animus, whatever you want to call it. It's just undifferentiated energy. And it's that energy that if you have that energy, you're alive. If you don't, you're a corpse. So there's that. And then if you look at it, our experience of that energy, without us being aware of it, it'll fall into one of three categories: pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. If it's pleasant, we unconsciously want more and ever increasing quantities. If it's unpleasant, we want to nuke it and make it go away. If it's unpleasant, we want to make it go away. If it's neutral, we get bored. But when you experience, and this is when you really kind of break down the meditative experience, when you have an unpleasant experience, for example, your mind is going to come up with a thought about it. And it'll be like, oh, I really don't like this. This reminds me of the time when da 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 da, and you go on and on and on. So we develop thoughts from that felt sense. If you're not aware of the thoughts and you think the same thought, let's say 1,000 times, that thought will calcify into a belief.
Mhm.
And if you're not aware of the beliefs in your life, they'll form your habits. And if you're not aware of your habits, they form your character. And if you're not aware of your character structure, well, that becomes your destiny.
Mhm.
So the question is, where do we pay attention? We can explore our habits, our character, we can explore beliefs, we can explore our thoughts and the emotional quality that goes with thoughts, or we can explore the foundation, that energetic arising of sensation. And so that's why in meditation, in some forms of meditation, when you get lost in a thought form, you acknowledge it, you let it go, and then you come back to the body, you come back to the felt sense of here and now, and you begin to sever your identification process. But what's so interesting is how when we really explore our thoughts, our emotions, our beliefs, and we can sort of like look under, let's say, an emotion and ask ourselves, well, where do I feel that inside? How intimately can I locate it? And if we bring our attention to that, just becomes such an interesting inquiry. When you realize there's a feeling of sadness. Well, what does sadness feel like? Oh, well, maybe it's like a tightening around the chest and it's kind of radiating up into the throat. And maybe there's some tendrils kind of going down into your stomach and you sort of sit with it like you're sharing a park bench. You just be with it. And you're establishing a very kind of intimate relationship with. You might inquire, well, how old is this? And it might be like, wow, this is as long as I can remember. This has been living on the inside. And then you can ask different questions like, well, what does this need right now? How does this want me to be with it right now? And then listen. It's that listening becomes so, so interesting.
Mhm.
And quite often, there can be a sense of like sort of either tracing back what's there, what's there, how it wants to be held, how it wants to be seen. Sometimes there are insights associated with it. Sometimes just by paying attention to it, it'll begin to shift and move. And as a yogini, you know that prana is intelligent and it's evolutionary. It's designed to make you more whole. So quite often people will experience just say by translating sadness and locating it and being with it, you shine the light of awareness on it, or the light of compassion on it, it'll begin to shift or move or change. And then there'll be what we think of as a felt shift. And quite often it'll get expansive, it'll flow, it'll move, and then guess what? It's going to go to the next place where it's not flowing. And so we sort of stay with that same kind of practice. It's really kind of an inner yoga. Like in yoga, you go to a pose where it hurts good. Like this is unpleasant, but I just intuitively know if I
Good
hang,
hurt.
breathe, something's going to shift and I'm going to feel great. It's kind of the inner yoga of that practice.
We could use this language of like interoception. Think about Dogen when he said, step back to turn the light inward, right? Like to take the backward step that turns the light inward. And there, it's something about awakening to our lived experience, and then that deep listening that you're speaking of, which is actually, it's a form of love, right? To listen is a form of love. So it's one of the things that surprises me again and again is how especially if I'm passing through something that feels challenging, or I'm like my mind is really chewing on something, struggling, that just coming into the intimacy of listening to what is emerging in the body, what is moving, what is not moving, just applying the intelligence, the intelligent awareness, right? Or I should say, applying my awareness to the intelligence
Yeah.
of that aliveness and how it wants to, what it is communicating in the only language, in its own language, it is a form of healing.
Exactly. And it's its own language. So we have to listen in a way that we can actually hear what it wants to communicate. And something Swami Kripalu said that really struck me. He said that love is a secondary manifestation of presence. That's when if we're fully present, love is a manifestation from that. When I first heard it, I thought, wow, that's so interesting. Because I thought I'm really lousy at love, but I'm pretty good at presence. And so that whole idea of really being with, and the analogy I love is like when you have that felt sense, just that, that feeling inside, like either something's off or something's calling your attention. I like to think of it as a wild animal at the edge of the woods. When you see a deer in the woods, at the edge of the woods, you can't seduce it in, you can't chase it, but you can let it know that you see it, and it knows that you see it. And that's you've just established a relationship. It's maybe a little tenuous, but it's very intimate relationship. And that kind of inner meditative listening is part of that sense of like, oh, I see you.
Mhm.
You know, is there a sense of how you want me to be with you right now?
Mhm.
Is there a sense of what this needs? And then again, that listening. And the really cool thing about that inner work is it's based on this whole idea that the body doesn't lie. And you can actually validate. You can validate and verify. It's um, like I remember I was working with someone and they were in touch with some feeling inside. And I said, was there a sense of how it wants you to be with it? Right? And it said, yeah, it wants me to make it go away. Yeah, I said, okay, let's validate that. Let's go back in. Do those words resonate with the feeling?
Yeah.
And as you can imagine, said, no, that's not it. And I love that part of the practice of just going back and verifying, do these words really resonate with the felt sense that's happening right now? And quite often, there's some subtle or not so subtle deepening of understanding or insight.
Mhm. One of the things I'm feeling into as you're speaking is how the image of the animal at the edge of the woods, it's also points to how we can discover some amount of freedom in how we relate to these things, right? That some animals, like, you're not going to go stand directly in front of and stare at, right?
Yeah.
You're going to hold a little bit with some reserve, with some caution. You're going to keep yourself, centered in a, benevolent anchor,
Yeah.
right? Whatever that might be. But there's a freedom, of course, and these bodies will tell us whatever we're needing to know. We can listen internally, we can listen. And also the mindfulness piece of it is, what quality of spaciousness can we have in
Yeah.
how we relate to these things?
Exactly. Exactly. It's Sokni Rinpoche said that compassion is the lubrication that allows you to let go of something. But I know you're familiar with the acronym of RAIN,
Mhm.
to the R to recognize what's presenting. And then the A is to ask, can I allow it? And that's such an important part as we're sort of like deconstructing our sense of self or deconstructing pain, is to really ask, can I be with this right now? And a lot of people tend to overlook that question because there's a sense of like, I'm going to find out what it is and I'm going to nuke it, and which doesn't work so well. But when you have that wild animal at the edge of the woods and you ask, does it feel safe to be with this right now? You really need to really deeply ask and listen, because sometimes there'll be a felt sense of like, conditions aren't right now. Either you don't have enough energy, maybe you need more support, maybe you're too scattered, whatever it may be. But it's so strategic when you have that sense of like, not now, to let it know you see it, let it know another time when the conditions are different. Your intention is to be with it, but not now. And it's so important to remember that because this process of awakening, it involves both wisdom, you know, our capacity to see clearly, but equally, if not more, it calls on love and compassion, our capacity to be with and to hold. Oh, we're just going to complete the acronym. So, for those who aren't familiar, to recognize what's presenting, to sense if you can allow it or accept it. And if you can, then to investigate. And so the investigation, I find that somatic investigation is pretty juicy. But you can also investigate any beliefs that are present and so forth. And finally, the N is to sense if you can nourish what you find, really, really call on loving presence as a powerful tool for transformation.
There was an evolution in rain that I remember. I don't know the circumstances of how, but
Yes,
to go
Rain
from that,
2.0.
yeah, the 2.0, where the N that used to be in this meditative technique, non-attachment, right?
Or non-identification. Same thing. Same
Non-identification
thing.
evolved into nurture.
Yeah.
And this feels like so key for what it means to really like embody our humanity, to come home to our humanity, because non-identification can feel a little like
Premature transcendence.
thank you. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And the more I practice that technique, of rain, the inquiry I like is like, if I hold this in loving presence, how does this move or shift or change? It's such a simple inquiry, but it's pretty potent. At any time when we just remember that, again, you described that stepping back, like to step back and call on loving presence. It changes the frame, it changes the whole game.
How does this particular practice, but really also, I think one of the things that really occurs to me in the sort of age we're stepping into of AI, right, is what does it mean to be human? We are living in these bodies, this incredible instrument of feeling that is, irreplicable, via technology. Like, what does it really mean to be a sentient being, having, a kinesthetic experience? And I think that when we apply inquiries like rain, it's sort of it can go into a very intimate, sort of personal inquiry place. But then I think the question for me also becomes, then how do we engage with the world? Like, how do these practices extend into living in our human experience at a time when life moves really fast? Most people are conditioned away from presence. Most of us, I should say, are conditioned away from presence. And there's really a pretty constant barrage of informational noise, and actual noise pulling us out of embodied presence.
The teacher Adyashanti once said, no one ever got enlightened by adding anything. And I love that phrase because I really do feel if you really want to wake up in life, it is a practice of deconstruction. You're deconstructing your conditioning. When we're these little beings, we're these little hard drives with no virus protection, you know, and we just sort of osmotically take on information. Our parents are gods, and we structure our life, on that early conditioning and the conditioning through our lives. So much of it, I think, is around finding out who we're not, in the practice. And I think that's such an important part of it. And I know for myself and for so many people, I'm sure you've seen this a lot, is when people really start practicing, the best analogy I can come up is that it's vibrational. So let's say you're vibrating here, and then you start to really pay attention, and you start to realize what drains you and what feeds you and what's no longer a match. And many people say, like, I'm just not enjoying my friends anymore. Or I used to really love these kind of movies, but I can't stand them now because your vibration is changing. And things that were a match before are no longer a match now. And I think that kind of goes on and on as we live, as we really pay attention. And where I think somatic inquiry is so important because it really keeps us grounded, energetically and vibrationally into what really enlivens us, what really drains us, what's honestly and truly between us and feeling free becomes clearer over time. Not necessarily easier, but I do think it becomes clearer over time.
Yeah.
And I think it gets even harder because I know for many, many people who've been practicing for a long time, the more you practice, the more the sense of the observer strengthens. Your capacity to observe without judgment. You have much, there's more clarity and so forth. But if we think of it as deconditioning, you're sort of deconstructing. In the beginning, it's low-hanging fruit. But as you continue to practice, you're deconstructing things that are maybe pre-verbal,
Mm.
and it becomes it's always engaging. Put it that way.
Yeah. Always endlessly fascinating.
Endlessly fascinating and endlessly challenging. Yeah, yeah.
Thank you, Jonathan.
So good to have this conversation and so many blessings in everything that you're doing.
Thank you. And so appreciate your continual light thread of connection over the years. I was remembering as I was kind of turning my attention towards speaking with you today that when I was 17, I moved to Washington, D.C. to go to Georgetown. And I very quickly looked around, speaking of energetic resonance and dissonance, and I was like, I don't think that a college campus is really going to work for me so well. And so I found the Ashtanga Yoga Center, and I found Tara's talks once a week up at the
Mm.
Unity Church. And it was a lifeline for me through my college years to be able to, and I was pretty voyeuristic about it. I really didn't, I didn't really, step into like a committed practice until years later, but it was really important, touchstone throughout those years. So the power of this Sangha that you have been such a formative part of, and now it's like out, so beautifully reverberating in the world and through so many teachers. So bowing and and lots of gratitude to you and a lot of blessings on your
Well,
path.
thank you. Thank you. And to you, it's your practice really shines through who you are. It's, when we talk about what you can't not do, it's very evident that this is who you are. So deeply,
Yeah.
deeply touched.
Hey friends, thank you so much for listening today. If you find value in these conversations, here's how you can support. Become a subscriber at shawnparell.substack.com, and please rate, review, and share your favorite episode with a friend. I leave you with an original song written by Serena Joy Bixby for all of us still learning what it means to be human.
Is it love? Is it hate? Grief or heartache? Or what does it mean to be human? Is it tears? Is it laughter? Is it not knowing what comes comes after? What does it mean to be human? Well, I'm sure I don't know. This life, where it goes. The days come, the days go, and I'm still human. Oh, one thing I know for sure is I'm looking for more. Gonna go out, learn what it means to be human. I find the joy in the mess. Oh, I'm just doing my best. Oh, learning what it means being human. Oh, learning what it means being human. I'm learning. Oh, learning what it means being human.